Strong determination sitting. What is strong determination sitting? Well, it is by far the most powerful meditation technique on the planet, and I say that without exaggeration. It is truly the most powerful meditation technique on the planet, but it's also the most brutal and rigorous and intense meditation technique on the planet. And so as I'm going to be describing this technique in this video and sharing my perspectives with it, please understand that we can't just always default to this type of sitting, to this form of meditation when we sit down. There is a warning that I need to communicate as well. So please understand that even though you will get rapid results from this meditation technique, it can also drag you down into episodes of like Dark Night of the Souls. It can bring up a lot of trauma or trigger a lot of us emotionally. So it's not something to mess around with. It's something to implement strategically when you feel it is appropriate, when your intuition is guiding you to use it. But that being said, when we utilize this technique, when we have breakthrough experiences using this technique, it leads to some of the most profound levels of consciousness that are possible within the human experience. So first, what is strong determination sitting? Well, it's basically when we make a commitment to ourselves at the beginning of a meditation sit, or perhaps even midway through a meditation sit, we make the commitment to not move. So at first, this is very easy. If you make the commitment to not move for 10 minutes during a sit, let's say it's a 10-minute sit, that's probably pretty doable. Nothing much is gonna happen. You're just gonna sit still for 10 minutes and nothing much will arise. But when we make this commitment, when we make this vow to not move, and we're sitting for something like 60 minutes or maybe even something like 2 hours, suddenly not moving becomes one of the most painful experiences of our life. The body starts to erupt in a lot of physical pain when we make a commitment to be perfectly still. The other thing that we have to keep in mind more generally when we're practicing at something like, let's say, 2 hours a day or something like a 2-hour sit, is that there's already an emotional labor involved with sitting for that long of a period of time. We address some of this in my most recent episode. I'll link that in the top or whatever. But there's an emotional investment that is involved with sitting for long periods of time. So there's already emotional pain that can erupt from sitting for long periods of time. If we add on the commitment to not move, we're suddenly dealing with not only emotional disruptions to our perceptive experience, but now we're dealing with physical pain as well. And so this can be a very challenging form of meditation practice. However, there are also milder forms of practicing SDS, which is how I'll refer to it moving forward, or strong determination sitting. There are other ways to practice SDS sitting besides just not moving. So a lighter form of this form of practice would be making the commitment to sit for, let's say, 2 hours. So let's say maybe we're normally accustomed to sitting for 60 minutes or 90 minutes. Well, in a sense, when we make the vow to sit for 120 minutes, this is a form of duration training. It's a lighter form of this sort of strong determination sitting. Now, it's not quite the same as a standard SDS sit according to the rules of the technique, at least how I've learned them, or how I've learned them from my teacher, but it still is a form of SDS sitting. So if you feel like you want to experience some of the intensity and rigor of this technique without making the full commitment of the remaining completely stationary, this is an alternative method of practice. Another alternative method of practice would be, rather than just committing fully to not move, you can apply something like a 3-strike rule. So you're doing your SDS sit and you're just experiencing excruciating amounts of pain. You can, in a sense, the first time you feel like moving, that's strike 1. The second time you feel like moving, that's strike 2. And then on the third time, when when your mind and your emotional system is just begging you to move, you can go ahead and alleviate the pressure and move. So that's another form of experiencing SDS without actually committing to the full intensity. I will say, just for full transparency, that form of strong determination sitting is the way that I practice most regularly. I haven't quite reached the point where I am consistently doing SDS sits for long periods of time. I like to have the breathing room and the freedom to move if my body is telling me, hey, I'm struggling here, I need to move. There's a level of masochism that is involved with this technique that's not always the healthiest. And so the final point about this technique that is crucial, that we have to cover, is that the only real rule that stays consistent no matter what type of version of SDS you're doing is to not harm the body physically. So don't hurt your body, do not injure the body. That's like the only rule that is always a part of SDS and more generally meditation. So we should not be forcing ourselves into full lotus if we're not ready. We should not be forcing ourselves into half lotus if we're not ready. We should not even be forcing ourselves to sit on a cushion on the ground if we're not ready for that. If we need to sit in a chair, that's a completely viable option, especially if we grew up in Western society. So don't physically harm the body. That is the most important rule for strong determination sitting. Now, why in the world would we be interested in practicing something like this? Well, one of the fundamental dualities that creates our sense of self and creates a sense of separation with the world is the aversion to pain. The other side of that duality would be the seeking of pleasure, but in the context of SDS, this aversion to pain is the fundamental duality, the fundamental attachment that we are investigating when we practice like this. So very rarely will you have an SDS where you don't experience pain, unless it's a shorter duration, maybe 10, 20 minutes, but most likely, we will experience physical pain, and we're going to have to confront experientially that physical pain. Something very interesting begins to happen to the mind as it's able to just bask in that pain and be with it with equanimity. So when we're building equanimity around pain, we are, in a sense, training a quality of mind that is able to fearlessly confront very harsh manifestations of reality, so to speak. When we're able to sit in suffering without suffering, this is the beginning of the cessation of suffering. One of my meditation teachers has talked about that from his training when he was studying from different masters and going on his hero's journey basically with meditation, becoming a meditation teacher and a meditation master, that in his experience meeting these various meditation masters, the overwhelming majority of them practiced a lot of strong determination sitting. That just seemed to be one of the keys to really taking this practice of meditation to its limit. And I find this very interesting because it shows just how serious this practice can get when we're confronting this level of physical pain, physical suffering, torture even, self-imposed torturing. Like, when we're able to meet these things with compassion, when we're able to meet the pain with compassion and equanimity, acceptance, space, when we're able to experience the pain fully and directly without our minds losing its sense of inner peace, this has profound implications for how we experience life. Suddenly that stressful event at work, not a problem at all. Suddenly a physical injury that we have, or going to the emergency room, perhaps getting our blood drawn, or whatever, pushing ourselves in the gym, that requires physical pain. All of these forms of pain that are a natural part of reality, that are a natural part of what it means to be human, we confront those. We have the power within ourselves to confront them with a deep equanimity that we are constantly training from this form of meditation practice, or more generally meditation. So when we make it a focus to commit to SDS, it unlocks an enormously powerful way of perceiving the world that does not reject a large part of the world. If you think about it, like a lot of people that don't meditate, and even a lot of meditators, there is this constant repulsion of pain and this constant seeking of pleasure and stimulation and comfort, security, these types of things. When we commit to sitting with ourselves and letting whatever arise, whether it's pain or bliss, with equanimity, we are training our minds to be in harmony with all forms of reality. And when that barrier of separation between I want this, I don't want that, dissolves, when we can be with all of it, we are stepping into cosmic consciousness, to put it poetically. Consciousness that has the ability to hold space for all forms of reality, not just hold space for the egoic biases that we've been programmed with by society, family, culture, ourselves, with our own habits. We step into a space that is able to actually transcend manifest reality, but not in a way that is bypassing reality and rejecting, but actually a way that is stepping fully into the presence of reality in all of its forms. Now, I do want to give a warning message about strong determination sitting, or SDS, because as you can probably tell, it is quite intense. It is like the most intense form of meditation practice, aside from maybe like, you know, sitting in fire or like sitting in cold exposure meditation, these types of things. Aside from situations where you were like actively seeking additional amounts of pain, in addition to strong determination sitting, it's the most intense form of practice. And because it's the most intense form of meditation, it's also the form of meditation that has the highest capacity to trigger us emotionally. It can get quite intense sitting in that amount of pain for that extended period of time. And again, we need to remember that there's also the emotional labor involved with sitting in the lack of stimulation, which is just the typical challenges of meditation on top of dealing with the physical pain. So please understand that if you do have traumatic memories, trauma that you are actively processing, going to a therapist or looking to heal within yourself, there's a high likelihood that this form of practice will trigger that within you. There's also a high form of probability, or a high percentage of probability that this form of practice may demotivate you from continuing to practice or want to practice. You might feel a little bit like averse, or like there's aftershock when you're done sitting, like a holy fuck, like I don't want to do that again. That's not fun. That's not pleasurable. And we have to keep in mind that meditation is a practice of human happiness. It's not supposed to like make our lives miserable. So if you feel like you're practicing like this and it's just making you more miserable, I would actually encourage you to back off, or consider that sometimes it's okay to take one step back so that you can take 2 steps forward. You have to be careful with this form of practice from an emotional point of view. This form of practice can also create a sense of vulnerability and lack of safety within our immediate space during practice and also when we're done. So just feelings of like overstimulation and feeling extremely vulnerable and sometimes unsafe. This form of practice can also create massive amounts of internal talk. So internal dialogue where you're just maybe even like cussing yourself out or freaking out from like a dialogue point of view. You can start having flashes of really like graphic images. I know that during one of my most intense strong determination sits was for 3 hours. I did not make the full 3 hours. I sat for the full 3 hours, but I did not make the full 3 hours without moving. But at one point during the peak of the physical pain, I started having these like very graphic images of disembodied body parts. So I won't go into detail, but you can imagine it was not fun sitting in the middle of that, watching my mind project these very violent images. So that kind of stuff can happen. You can have very dark imagery start to appear in your mind. And you can also physically hurt the body. And so you have to be very cognizant and aware, what is the pain of my legs going numb and not moving, and what is an appropriate, or what is an inappropriate type of pain that's signaling that my body is going to get injured if I keep going. When we're in the middle of a strong determination sit, sometimes having the sensitivity towards our bodies to know what is okay, what's good pain, quote unquote, and what's bad pain can start to blur. So this is a danger and worth considering. When we are practicing strong determination sits, I would highly, highly, highly suggest that you incrementally increase your capacity to do so. So don't start with something like an hour, work your way up, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that, rather than just jumping in for the full time period. So those are just some of the warning messages that I wanted to call out. Like I said, it's a very intense form of practice, it's a very triggering form of practice, and it can also be a dangerous form of practice, both psychologically and physically. So even though the rewards of what this type of work, what this type of sitting can do are enormous, it's one of those things where you can't just be constantly hammering yourself with SDS. Like, you have to slowly work your way up and allow the practice to unfold, or allow this form of practice to unfold in an intelligent, strategic, and compassionate way. So when should you practice strong determination sitting? Well, I wouldn't just immediately start off with this form of meditation practice, especially if you are new. If it is a struggle to sit for something like 60 minutes, I would not recommend this form of practice. This is an advanced technique. This is something to be used strategically, and this is not something to be played around with. So when you are comfortable with something like 60 minutes, when you have a strong, dedicated daily practice, something like you've been consistently meditating every day for 6 months, 12 months, even beyond, then you can start considering this form of practice. I'm not going to say that it doesn't have advantages even in the beginning, but in the beginning of your practice, if you are new to meditation, it's critical that you start building that daily habit. And because this form of practice is so disorienting and so disruptive to our psychology, to our emotions, there comes with it the risk that you're going to burn yourself out and quit, or lose your momentum with your standard form of practice. So if you are a new meditator, I would not recommend this technique. If you're an intermediate meditator, again, you've been meditating consistently for 6 months, 12 months, that kind of thing, start slowly integrating it. Work your way up. If you are an advanced practitioner, or at least more advanced, something like 2-3 years of consistent, solid daily practice, I would recommend throwing them in there once a week, maybe even something like at the beginning of your sits. You just have a passive, I'm going to see how long my body is capable of meditating without moving. And you don't time it, you don't worry about making the whole sit about a strong determination sit, you just sit for as long as you feel comfortable without moving, and let your intuition and your body guide you when it's had enough, when the pain has become unbearable, and just sort of auto-regulating the practice rather than a harsh, hard-nosed commitment. That's what I would recommend if you are an intermediate meditator. This is how I would define myself. I don't consider myself an advanced practitioner quite yet. And that's even a whole different topic that we don't want to get into in this video. What does it mean to be a beginner, intermediate, or advanced practitioner? But that's my approach to strong determination sitting. I will have moments and time periods where I do make a dedicated effort of not moving, and that is the practice. But for intermediates, I think it's most important to just start getting more and more comfortable with physical pain. Because believe it or not, even when we are in the middle of massive amounts of physical pain, we can also be experiencing massive amounts of emotional pleasure, like happiness, or physical pleasure, like rapture or bliss. So these types of hedonic valences within our perceptive experience can be occurring at the same time, regardless of the amount of pain that we're in. This is an interesting thing to explore when we start to be able to access these states of mind. But if you are an intermediate, again, you want to slowly be integrating this form of practice into your sits in a compassionate and patient way or orientation. If you are an advanced practitioner, I would say this is probably one of the most effective strategies that you can be using to increase your meditation results. So if you feel like you have been stagnant with your meditation, but you've been consistent for like 5, 6, 10 years, you know, something like long like this, I would probably say, like if someone were to come to me and ask, hey, how can I rapidly increase my meditation results, or how can I make a breakthrough, have some sort of spiritual awakening of some kind, I would say transform your relationship to pain. Because this, again, this relationship to pain is so fundamental to our sense of self, to our sense of attachment with the world, being an individuated, separate biological being. When you can break through this barrier, this fundamental, primordial, biologically derived barrier to pain, you're dissolving one of the most intense yet subtle attachments that you have to this feeling of separateness, to this feeling of being a self. So if you're looking to do that, even if you're not advanced, I mean, if you're just looking to really, really dive into dissolving your sense of self in the sense of understanding your existential nature, this is one of the most powerful ways to do it, man. This is one of the most powerful forms of practice. This is one of the most powerful forms of building equanimity, building mindfulness. As long as we have deep attachments to pleasure and comfort, and have deep attachments to the rejection of pain and discomfort, that's going to be manipulating the way that we see the world, the way that we are interpreting our experience, the sense of what it means to be. So even if on some level we've seen through the illusory nature of self, merely by having this deep-rooted attachment, there is self-activity and forms of identification and forms of feeling separate, feeling isolated. There are going to be forms of existential misunderstanding as long as this attachment exists. So you, again, can have massive breakthrough experiences with no self, with emptiness, with God, with consciousness. But because we have this attachment to ourselves, or excuse me, to pain, the aversion of pain, it's distorting our view. And we haven't actually broken through as deeply into the nature of consciousness as we would be able to if we didn't have a problem sitting in our own pain. That was a mouthful, man. That was a lot. This video is intense. This is such a profound topic. There are so many implications related to this single attachment of being averse to pain or fear or discomfort, these kinds of things, negative experiences. I couldn't cover all of it in a single video even if I wanted to. But because of that, it's worth exploring, in my opinion. So I hope this video was of value, was of use. If you have any thoughts, questions, sit reports that you'd like to share, please leave them in the comment section below. If you like this style of content, please subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Until next time.